Hi everyone, we're here at Conneaut Lake Veterinary Hospital and I'm with Dr. Don Consla and we're going to do a presentation today on an overweight dog. That shouldn't have been real hard for us to find someone, should it? What percentage of dogs are supposedly overweight?
It's a pretty good percent, 60% I think some of the studies out there say, but at least a good portion of them are.
Some are just a little bit, but some are like...
Yeah, it ranges anywhere, from just a little overweight to morbidly obese in some cases.
Okay, well this is Tyler, and Tyler is my, I think, 7.5-year-old Shih Tzu, and he is a little bit overweight, and that's why we decided to use him today. We just weighed him, and Tyler weighs about 22 pounds, and in my opinion, he should weigh probably about 18 pounds. I think that's what he was when he was at ideal weight. He is really tough to keep keep his weight down low because he's so difficult to deal with. And he looks at you with those eyes and he says, couldn't I please just have a little bit more to eat? And I'll tell you some of the techniques that I've used too. But how do you determine if a dog's overweight?
So the term that we use in the veterinary world is something called a body condition score, or a BCS. And this can be on a scale from 1 to 5 or 1 to 9, just depending on which hospital you're at. But the ideal is, here we use the 1 to 5 scale. So perfect is in the middle at 3. 1 is horribly emaciated, and 5 is obese. Okay. So 2 would be underweight, but not to the point of severe emaciation. 4 would be overweight, but not quite obese yet.
Tyler.
So we want a perfect 3 is kind of our ideal situation.
He missed that point. I think he's a 4 because he's a little bit overweight.
And so we look at a few different areas of the dog to kind of gauge where they're at on that scale. So the first thing that I always check is the dog's rib cage. So if he's standing here, his ribs are right here. And if you feel back and forth, you can feel the rib cage. You kind of want it to be like the back of your hand. If you touch the back of your hand, if you push just a little bit, you can feel each individual bone. But you don't have to push too hard, right? You kind of glide your fingers over with just a little bit of pressure and you can feel that. That's how we want it to feel on a dog. I don't want to be able to see the ribs because that's underweight, and I don't want to have to squeeze to find the ribs because that's overweight. But with just a little bit of gentle pressure, if I can feel them, then that's kind of appropriate for the rib area and how much fat should be there.
Are there certain breeds that are more prone to overweight than others?
I don't think particularly so. It tends to be, more like lifestyle and diet and things like that. There are some breeds that can have more serious consequences if they are overweight. Think about like the long, short-legged breeds like Dachshunds, Corgis, Basset Hounds, things like that. Those are chondrodystrophic breeds, which means they have shorter cartilage growth in their limbs in different areas.
What was that term?
Chondrodystrophic.
Oh, okay.
It's our fun 50-cent word for the
day.
day.
Oh, that is, or 75 cent. Okay.
But, we know that their joints are already, angled and a little bit different than, say, a longer-legged dog. And so any additional weight puts extra stress on an already, different type of joint, which can predispose to more problems and things. We'll talk about some of that stuff.
Okay, so you looked at
here.
What about his ribs? What's the story on Tyler's
so
ribs?
I have to push a little bit harder than I would like to. I would say he's like a 3.5.
Okay.
If I were to give him a numerical number. I don't have to push too hard. The ribs are definitely there, but there's a little extra cushion in between the ribs and my hands.
Now, I've also read sometimes that if you are standing above a dog and look down on a dog, you want to see that little bit of an indentation right below the ribs before it gets to the back legs.
That's right. So
there's not a lot of indentation here.
So we call that the waist, just like in people. And so that's, basically the end of the rib cage, and then going back towards the start of the pelvis. So in that space there's not really any bony structures or anything. It's just kind of the abdominal muscles. So it should kind of dip in naturally. Now in dogs that get overweight, so the 4s and the 5s, they will develop a fat pad in this area. So oftentimes I have people, come in and say, oh, there's this mass on my dog. It's been there for a while. It's kind of slowly developing. But it's actually just the fat pad that's in this area here. And it can seem mass-like because it's kind of encapsulated, and it stays in one area. But it's actually, in an overweight animal, it's a normal thing to have a fat pad there.
Okay, so as an owner, first of all, I should feel the ribs and see if I've got to push in like I do here with Tyler a little bit, and then I can look down from above and I can see that there's a little bit of an indentation in the waist here.
And
Anything else I can see?
It's almost like an hourglass. It comes down from the ribs, dips in a little bit, but not too much, and then kind of comes out at the pelvis.
Okay, what else can I, as an owner,
The other thing
see?
we can look at, if we'll stand up here for us.
Probably not.
And it's a little harder for him because he has a fancy haircut, but you can also kind of look at the side and that area where we're looking at the waist, and there should be like a nice tuck in the abdomen.
Okay.
So it shouldn't be, really distended and hanging down. It should tuck up a little bit as the abdomen tapers back towards the pelvis.
Looking at him
and the
side
legs.
view. Okay.
Right. So it's almost like looking at a side view, he's almost the shape of a triangle. So it's flat across the top, flat down here, and then it should angle up back towards the pelvis.
Okay, so I've come in to see you, and you've looked at Tyler, and he's here for his yearly exam, and you say, you know what, Sue, I think he's getting a little bit heavy. What are some tests that we can do now? Are there some tests that we can do to see how he's doing?
So sometimes we will recommend some tests depending on the situation.
Okay.
Now, like in his case, he's, like I said, like a 3.5, very mildly overweight. Most likely that has to do, just with lifestyle, his activity, how he likes to eat, things like that. In some cases, though, we can see certain disease processes contribute to the overweight problem. So one thing that comes to mind is hypothyroidism. That's where the thyroid gland, which is in the neck area, regulates metabolism and things like that. It's not functioning as well as it should. We know that in dogs, the immune system gets a little confused and attacks that gland, and so the gland stops producing its normal hormone. So
But how would I know that?
The signs of that are typically an overweight dog, a dog that doesn't have much energy. We often notice skin problems with it, like some hair loss or a flaky, greasy coat, things like that. So if we're thinking in terms of the thyroid gland is, regulating metabolism, a normal functioning thyroid gland would, help you wake up and be active. It would help you, process the fats and things and all of that. And so it makes sense that a dog that's thyroid gland isn't functioning well would be overweight, not have a lot of energy, and have some other, issues like that. We can see some other kind of oddball signs with it, like some neurological problems and things, but the low energy level, overweight, and skin issues are kind of the big three that are most common. So it tends to be, middle-aged to older dogs.
I'm just going to ask you that. Is overweight more of an issue with a certain age of the dogs? Or?
Sometimes it can be older dogs, for example, the dog's getting older, isn't as active as it used to be, but it's still getting the same amount of food that it got when it was a 2-year-old puppy running through the woods every day. Okay. So sometimes we have to tweak things like that. But for the thyroid disease, we can rule it in or out with a blood test that we send off to the lab. It tells us, how much of that hormone is there, is it low? And are there signs that the immune system is attacking the gland?
What about a normal blood work?
And so, we kind of recommend that as part of just the wellness exam, especially in the geriatric patients. I would say the things that we're looking for on, the basic blood screening, like liver, kidneys, metabolic values like glucose and protein and things like that. Diseases that affect those organs tend to result more in weight loss. So if we're seeing the opposite, recent weight loss, sure, it could be kidney disease, liver disease, diabetes, things like that.
Well, I don't think you've ever examined him, but he does have, we think that he's on the verge or leaning a little bit towards a little bit of Cushing's because he's got some of those other little side symptoms that we've talked about. I've talked about with Dr. Wade or with Dr. Stanton. But,
and that's a good thing to bring up. That's another thing that we might look for sometimes if an overweight dog comes in. Cushing's disease doesn't really cause an obese dog, but they will look fat. So it's kind of tricky. So with Cushing's disease, we know that there's too much stress hormone in the dog's system. And stress hormone is geared to, that fight or flight type of mechanism. And so one of the components of that is breaking down fat and muscle and whatnot to use for energy and protein. And so the Cushing's dogs tend to look fat because those abdominal muscles have been, getting broken down to use for energy, and so they're not as strong, and so they start to stretch a little bit. So they tend to have that pot-bellied appearance and look overweight, but if you feel them, they might be really skinny in the ribs. They might have, if you feel by the waist, you can feel the vertebrae, but then there's this big distended belly. So it's not a true overweight. But sometimes people will bring their dog in saying, man, he seems to be really putting on the pounds lately. Look how big his belly is. And then, some subtle things that we can notice on the exam can kind of tip us off. Maybe he's not overweight. Maybe it's just more that there's distension in the belly and something else is going on.
Now, whenever I look on, a lot of people don't probably cruise the internet as much as I do, but a lot of times, you're looking at ideal body weight. Is that a fallacy, or should I be looking at that? Or sometimes I see it on the back of dog food, but then in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking to myself, well, they want to sell more food. So they probably are telling me to feed my dog more than possibly I even should, because I think that's an issue. Or how do I know if he's ideal?
Yeah, and so that's where your vet can tell you at the exam. They can say he's at the ideal body weight, like we just discussed. He's almost there. He's a titch over. We just need to tweak something a little bit, and then looking for those things that we discussed. If you're watching this and like, I don't think I've ever felt my dog's ribs. Then that's kind of a little tip off for you that maybe there's some weight issues there. But it's definitely important, that they're at the ideal body weight, because we can see so many other disease processes either come about as of being overweight or be exacerbated because the dog is overweight. So, and it can be simple things, like a dog with arthritis. We can recommend pain meds and physical therapy and laser treatment and all these other things, but one of the easiest things to do is just to get some weight off the dog.
Right.
Just think about, if the dog is even just a little overweight, like a 3.5, how much extra stress that's putting on the joints when they have to move that extra weight they carry.
That's really a big issue with the bigger dogs too, isn't it? I see that so much up at the bark park, and people come in for boarding or something, and I'll look at this dog and say, whoa. They've really done a good job feeding that dog. He's so big, and I always want to say to these people, you're probably taking years off his life because you're just overfeeding him to the point that he's huge, the obese. And we see an awful lot of obese, and I'm sure you do too.
It's very, very common. We know now, in the medical world, I think we've known for a long time that obesity causes problems. There's no kind of question about that. But a lot of studies that have come out more recently have kind of clued into why that is. And we know that the molecules that make up fat are pro-inflammatory, meaning they signal the rest of the body to be angry and inflamed. And so it's not just like this substance, that just sits in the body. It's an active substance. It's secreting hormones and causing other tissues to react and causing, just inflammation throughout the body. So that's one of the reasons, not just the dog's carrying extra weight, which puts stress on things, it can cause problems that way, but it's also an active substance. It's not just a blob sitting there. It's actually telling the body to do other things, which stresses and weakens the other organs and causes damage elsewhere. So that's the biggest thing. Most people just tend to think, oh, it's hard on his joints, he can't exercise as much, he's hot, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, there's a lot more going on in obese dogs than just those kind of things that you think of right off the bat.
That's really a sensitive topic to say to people. I know when we were talking about doing this video, and we were talking about getting a dog that's overweight, and I knew several, and I thought, whoa, I'm not about to say to these people, your dog is really overweight or really fat. So that's why we ended up using Tyler, who's just a little bit overweight, but some of them are just enormous. And to me, whenever I say that to somebody, they automatically think they're guilty, and they probably are guilty in many cases. But I say, the dog, you need to get some weight off that dog. That dog is just so big.
Right. It's a very sensitive subject.
Oh yeah, they get real mad.
Because a lot of people, I think, interpret it as, like, if I say, oh, hey, your dog's overweight, they can interpret it as, I'm saying they're not doing a good job taking care of their dog. You're not a good owner, you don't love your dog. when your vet tells you that your dog is overweight, they don't mean to imply those things in any way whatsoever. You know, our job is to look out for the dog's well-being and kind of be their advocate. There are ways that, you know, we can help you as the owner, you know, help the dog to get that extra weight off. It's not meant to be, you know, a slight or a dig at the owner. It's just a means of helping the dog be happier and healthier. And it's not that, you know, the owner is doing a bad job. It's just we need to pivot a little bit and switch some things up that are going on.
So how do I control weight on my dog?
So most commonly, I would say it's just the amount of food, the frequency of the feedings, and exercise.
Okay.
So in a regular adult dog, as far as feeding frequency, I think twice a day is kind of the standard.
Okay, now let me go back to that. My dogs are fed twice a day, and if they don't eat the food, because I've got 4 of them, I pick it up. Is there a difference in overweight dogs from those that live in a house where dogs graze, as opposed to dogs that are given food at regular intervals?
It depends on the dog.
Okay.
So there are some dogs that are just really picky, and if you don't leave that food down all day, they just like won't really eat, and they kind of regulate themselves. You know, they'll go in the morning, have a few bites, lunchtime go have a few more, mid-afternoon have a little bit more. And you know, if they can regulate themselves, that's fine. I would say the majority of dogs don't do that. Like my little Charlie, you remember him from our last taping?
Yep.
As soon as the food in the bowl hits the floor, he's wolfing it down. You know, if I left food out, like free choice, he would be a balloon. You know, he'd be a sausage.
So with Tyler, because with 4 dogs, as soon as there were 4 different dishes there or whatever, he would eat. He would be there, and if somebody came over, he'd say, "Oh no, that's really mine."
Yeah.
And he would eat until he exploded. So I really have to watch him. One of the things I've used with him, ever since I had him as a puppy, he gobbled food, gobbled tremendously, and it's many times with the gobbling of food, then of course we had the food coming right back up again. And he's been, and I'm not sure people understand what it is, but he's been on a slow feeder his entire life.
Yeah.
And that's a bowl that has different things in the bottom, either a solid bottom or little sections coming in. And he's got the flat nose, of course, so he really has to work hard. So it slows him down. I give him the same amount of food, but he's got to move his position so many times that he's getting done the same time everybody else is getting done. He's had less food, but it's because he has a slow feeder. So slow feeders, I'm a real big believer in those.
I like those. They make like feeding puzzles. So you know they have to open different compartments to get the food, and that's a good tool that we can use for those dogs. You know, like Charlie. As soon as I put the bowl down, he eats it in 5 seconds, and then he's like, "All right, I want more food." This gives them a chance to have a longer meal. It takes their, you know, they have to think more about it. It's stimulating, it's enrichment, and it gets rid of that, you know, instant satisfaction, okay, I want more now, you know. It forces them to take a little bit longer to eat the meal, and so they get some more enjoyment out of it, and it's not, you're not standing there like, oh my gosh, he's still starving, you know. So that's a great tool to use in those dogs that just eat very rapidly.
I remember one time I was talking to Dr. Becky Stanton about this, and I said, I need to knock some weight off Tyler, and she said to me, well, how much of food does he eat? And I said, oh, about a cup. And she says, no, not about a cup. If you're going to take weight off him, you measure it exactly in the exact same container all the time. And then once you know what it is, then cut back, like if you give him a cup, cut back maybe a quarter of a cup or something like that, or cut back the food. But measure it, because otherwise we're always in a hurry. Open up the food container, take the
get a scoop,
put it in there, and you don't really know. And really, chances are sometimes because you're in a hurry, he's getting more food than he should be getting. And she was adamant, if this is what you're doing, this is exactly what you're doing. Don't change the container. Don't change anything. Best advice I ever had.
And we see that a lot. People say, because part of our basic history is, you know, what does your dog get to eat and how much? And, you know, people will say, oh, he gets a scoop. Well, what's a scoop? Half the time, you know, it's the old cottage cheese container. Some people use like a measuring cup scoop, whatever it is. So that's one of the first things that I do, just like Dr. Stanton recommended to you, is when we're starting, you know, to tweak the amount of food being fed. I say, okay, go home. Take your whatever your scoop or cup is. Here's a measuring cup. We give him a little measuring cup and actually measure how much it is. In Tyler's case, you know, if he's getting a cup and a half a day, which would be a lot for him. But you know, that's what he needs to maintain like good weight.
Don't say that too loud, because
he'll be like, oh sweet, I'm getting a cup and a half now.
When he gets about a third twice a day.
When we're recommending to decrease the food, you know, by 10 to 15% or something, we have to know how much he's actually getting, so that we don't go, you know, too low or you know, what have you. And so that's very important. You know, that's one of the first things that we say is, okay, let's find out how much he's actually getting, because one scoop doesn't really tell us a lot.
Okay, let's talk about something else. How long is it going to take him to lose weight? Now, if I have a dog that weighs 70 pounds, and I have Tyler that weighs 22. How long should it take me to get him down to 18 pounds? Like
4 to 8 weeks. We don't want to do it too rapidly. You know, just like people, you don't want to drop a lot of weight all at once. That can, you know, cause its own host of problems. So we want to do it gradually. And then, you know, those dogs that are really hungry all the time, if you go from a cup and a half today to a cup, that's only going to make that begging, intense, where's my food behavior even worse. So we like to do it more slowly over several weeks. That's the healthiest way to do it.
What's your feeling on people who give their dogs things? I know that a lot of people that I know of give their dogs green beans. And they'll just buy canned green beans, and not the ones that have the salt in them, but the ones that say no salt added or whatever. And then cut it up because it makes them believe they're getting food, but I'm right, it has no real nutritional value except for it fills up the belly and they tend to be full.
So
or carrots or...
I might get flack for this, I don't know.
Okay,
but
well, that's okay.
I do recommend...
We'll blame it on me.
I do recommend fruits and vegetables in some cases. So this is one of our points that we have on our outline here. There are some owners or some family members of owners that are always going to feed table scraps. I could tell them, look, your dog is going to die if you keep feeding table scraps. And they're going to keep doing it. So what I'll recommend in those cases, you know, like somebody's, you know, dad is staying with them, and the dad just keeps sneaking, you know, pork fat and hamburger and bread and whatnot off the table. If we can't get somebody to stop feeding table scraps, we can at least feed healthy table scraps that are safe for the dog. Because the fats, the carbs, that's not good. That can get us into a lot of trouble in other areas, which is another discussion for another time. But green beans, bell peppers, carrots, bananas,
do I have to cook
apples. No, they can be raw.
Raw.
Yeah.
A lot of dogs like them.
Now, not all vegetables are safe. So onions, garlic, things in that family, big no-no. Grapes, big no-no.
Oh, absolutely.
So, you know, if you're not sure if it's safe to feed, just call and ask your vet, and they can tell you if it's okay. But, you know, I don't know. Some people would say don't ever feed any table scraps, but at the same time, sometimes we have to be realistic, and some people are going to feed table scraps regardless of how it affects the dog's health. So if I can at least get them to feed something that's healthy for the dog, that's not adding extra calories and not putting them at risk for other diseases like diabetes and pancreatitis, you know, that's a better case scenario for me.
Well, let's go back to the dog food for a minute. On the back of the dog food pack, and most people are not going to get their dog food from a veterinarian. Most of them buy them at one of the local stores or something like that. Isn't it true that they probably need to stay away from the ones that have corn and stuff like that as a #1 ingredient?
No, and this is a big pet peeve of mine.
Oh, okay. Is it all right for that?
It's totally fine. Corn is an amazing food source. It has protein, lots of energy, all sorts of just good stuff in it. So what's happened recently in the pet food arena is that in the human world, there's this big trend of celiac disease, right? So all these like health organizations and stuff are, you know, saying stay away from grains and whatnot. People do have celiac disease. I'm not discounting that. It's a real thing. Lots of people have it, but not everybody does, and so not everybody has to avoid grains. But kind of the healthy trend right now is to avoid grains, you know, stick to more vegetables and meats and things like that. So what's happened as a result of that human trend is it's transferred over to the dog world, because people say, well, shoot, if I'm not supposed to be eating grains, my dog shouldn't be eating grains either. And, you know, part of that is that eating grains for most people is totally fine. And dogs can eat grains. So there's been, I think, one case of a gluten allergy, which is like celiac disease, reported in like one family of Irish setters back in like the 80s or 90s or something. There's been extensive testing done on it because it's such like a huge trend now, and there really isn't much validity to it. So now you have these gluten-free dog foods out there that are super expensive, and it's not really necessary.
A lot of people do the all-natural dog food too. I've seen a lot of people do that. Going back to the treats and stuff like that, sometimes whenever, what I've done with my dogs is instead of giving them treats that I can buy, sometimes the treat that I give is a piece of dog food because they don't know any better. And if I'm sitting at the table and I want to give them something, I can give them a little piece of the food that I'm giving them at the time or something like that. So that really cuts down. A lot of people give, I know so many people that give Cheerios as treats, little pieces of Cheerios. A lot of people do that. A lot of people have all kinds of things like that. But I think you really get into it whenever you get an awful lot of treats and just do it constantly. One of the things I talk about, because we've got the training classes that are kind of associated with the Bark Park, and the trainer always says, if you're coming to class, because a lot of people train their dogs, so that if they're training them how to do something in a training class, it's treat, 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 treat. It's constant. And what they always say to the people is, if you're going to do that, before you come here or whenever you leave, cut down his regular food or that dog's food by at least half or even more than that, because you're supplementing and giving them so many treats. You need to just not give all those treats at training class and then give all this food. Right. Because that's really a bad combination. Because a lot of trainers train their dogs on treats constantly. And using smaller treats or breaking up the treat, those types of things. They're still getting the same reward if it's the size of a pea or the size of a milk bone. So you can break it up and get less calories in that way too. What about exercise? Exercise doesn't look like you want to exercise much here, but exercise is a huge part of it. So eating the right amount of food, feeding the right amount of times, and just regular exercise. Those are kind of the basic things. And just a mildly overweight dog that we tweak first. And so it's just like people. The more exercise you get, the more fit you are. And so I don't know what else to say. Get them out there, right? Yeah. It doesn't have to be, a 20-mile hike in the woods. It can be, a lap around the block a few times a day. But something is better than nothing, and the more we can do or get them to do, the better it is for them. Tyler, you need to do more exercise. He says, I only do whatever whenever I want to. He says, all the other guys go and run, he says, and I stand back and I watch. But he's getting older now. Tyler is, as I said, almost 8, so he has slowed down a little bit. Yeah. As opposed to the younger ones that just keep running and running. What are some other things? Any other special foods I should be concerned about? Yeah. So let's say we've tried those basic things and the dog still isn't losing weight, or the dog is horribly obese and we know we need to really step up our game because they're just in a really bad spot. There are some other special things that we can do to get weight off quicker, and there's a few special foods that are prescription foods because they should be used, with the supervision of a veterinarian because, they do have more of an impact on the dog's body. We carry Hill's food here. So one of the foods is Hill's metabolic food. Okay. This is really good for kind of the couch potato dog that doesn't really want to be active. This is what my little Charlie's on. He gets excited about going for walks, but he taps out at about 2 miles. So, he's limited that way. And the rest of the day, he just sleeps. He snuggles on his little dog bed, he burrows in his blankets, and that's it. So he's just not super active. And so that food is kind of geared towards those dogs. It kind of ramps up the metabolism, but they can still get a nice full portion of food so they don't have that hunger feeling. Prescription diet is from a veterinarian. What about science diet? Science diet is... I think people see these terms and they think, oh, science diet, science must be good. Hill's is a dog food company. One of their brands is Science Diet. Okay. And then Science Diet has food that you can get at Tractor Supply, and then they also make the prescription Science Diet food that you can only get at a veterinarian. Okay, all right. So that's another possibility. Right.
Hills also makes a couple of other prescription foods like WD and RD, which are reduced calorie foods. So those ones are, for the horribly obese dog. It's so overweight we can't even like increase exercise. Those type of extreme situations.
Well, some of them get so heavy they can't move.
Yeah.
They can't do anything. It's about all they can do to even walk, and they're practically waddling whenever they're walking. It's tough for them. But you say in a couple months they should be able to get a lot of that weight off if they're really diligent about it.
Yeah, and the big thing is if we go with one of these prescription foods, the key is sticking to it. It's like a dog with allergies that's put on an allergy food. You have to stick to that food if you want to see the results. So if we put them on a restricted calorie diet, don't give them extra treats. It defeats the purpose. Or don't do less exercise because you figure, oh, he's on this low calorie food. That means I only have to walk him once a day as opposed to 3 times a day. So you have to stick to it. You can't. You have to follow the veterinarian's recommendations to really see the maximum benefit of those foods. They're prescription diets, so they're a little more expensive. So if you're taking that step, follow the instructions so you don't waste your money on the process.
And a big thing, of course, is, as we said before, which is probably, in my opinion, one of the most important, is to measure the amount of food that the dog's getting now, and then cut back on that. Cut back a fourth of it?
We usually recommend 10 to 15% to start.
And we can find out if that helps at all.
Right.
Anything else we need to know about overweight dogs?
It's very common. It can be very easy to tweak. Really don't be offended if your veterinarian says your dog is overweight. It's just an attempt for us to help, and it's a preventative measure. Like I said, we know how many effects obesity can have throughout the body. So we're not trying to make you feel bad. We're not saying you're a bad owner or anything like that. We're just trying to help you and your loved one to get them kind of on the most healthy right track.
Is there a big difference between canned dog food and dry food?
Not really. I mean, there's canned dog food that has less calorie than some dry foods. It just depends on the food.
People should really look at that to see what the number of calories or sugars or anything. Is there anything that I should look at on that bag? I mean, should I be standing at the local grocery store looking at the back of the bag to see what's in the food?
There's not a ton of information on the back of bags, honestly. I mean, it has like the crude amount of protein and fat and stuff, which may be helpful if you're looking at like a bunch of them, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really give you a lot of information. It's not like human food labeling. So, if it's just like a regular, adult dog, any standard adult food should be fine. And then we can tweak the amount if we need to. There's light foods, there's the prescription diets that we talked about. So, if you have any concerns, I would ask your veterinarian to help you kind of through the process.
So the food to get, cut back on the food if you can. Also, watch the treats, no table scraps, and things such as that.
Increase exercise.
Hey, real quick, what about underweight dogs? What do we do for them?
That, if it's like a stray or something, it's usually just a means of feeding a little bit more. There are a lot of different things that can cause an underweight dog, and it's usually disease related. So with overweight dogs, we're more preventing disease by getting them to an ideal weight. With underweight dogs, there's usually already something going on that we need to address. So in a puppy, it could be worms, and a stray it could be worms. It could be more serious things like liver, kidney disease, Cushing's, diabetes, whatever it may be. So that oftentimes entails a little bit more workup to kind of figure out what's going on and why the dog is underweight. Heart disease, cancer, all sorts of different things can cause it. So that tends to be more, testing and diagnostics to figure out, okay, this dog's underweight, but why? And like I said, it could be something as simple as, a parasite that they picked up that we give some dewormer for and talk about regular, prevention to keep it from coming back, to something more, serious, like a mass somewhere or, kidney disease, whatever it may be.
Okay, well, I think that's it. I think that's everything we need to cover. Thanks very much. Tyler says is he falling asleep there, or is he still with his eyes open? He says, as long as I'm here, I'm okay. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and we'll be looking at some other programs in the near future. Thank you.